This is East Coast Radio.
It's KZN's number one hit music station, East Coast Radio. Zonke is talking about feelings, and it's 7:23 right here on East Coast Breakfast with Danny and Zister standing in for Darren, Carmen, and Sky. And I think what we're about to talk about is going to get you in your feelings, right? There's a story coming out of the United States of America that's getting a lot of people talking, especially parents, young people, and anyone who spends time online.
Sister and I have been on this and across it, and a jury in Los Angeles has handed down a landmark ruling finding that social media platforms were intentionally designing a way that contributed to a young woman's addiction and ultimately harmed her mental health.
Yeah, now the story is interesting because the woman, who's now 20, was awarded millions in damages, and this case could have ripple effects for hundreds of similar cases still to come.
And let's be honest, it raises some big questions, hey? I think predominantly around responsibility, about how these platforms are built, and the impact they're having, especially on the younger users.
Yeah, we need to unpack this, man, Danny. And we'll also play a small moment about the ruling so you can hear it for yourself firsthand.
Breaking news, a verdict in the landmark case addressing the power and influence of social media. A Los Angeles jury today finding Meta and YouTube negligent in the design or operation of their platforms and saying the companies failed to warn users of the dangers of their services. The jurors found that the tech giant's platforms harmed a young user with features that made her addicted and led to mental health problems. Joining me now is Jacob Ward, veteran technology journalist.
For me, it is a historic moment. I really think that this is on a par with figuring out that cigarettes cause cancer or that we needed to have seatbelts in cars. This is a huge societal shift that we're seeing unfolding in front of us really in real time. And as a result, I think this is the end of social media as we know it, and it is definitely the end of childhood as we have come to accept it. We are seeing for the very first time a social media company found liable, in this case two of them, found liable for the design choices they made and for, as a result, addicting kids in a harmful way to their product. This is something that was unimaginable even a few years ago because these companies have enjoyed such powerful legal protections until now.
So after listening to that, we have one question for you, which is, have you ever felt addicted to social media? And be honest here when we ask you this question. How much time do you actually spend on it daily? I hope your day has started off so well. Now, let's start with numbers. In South Africa, research from Stellenbosch University shows teenagers are spending over 3 hours a day on their phones on average. Hectic.
And then when you look at adults, Danny, that jumps to around 6 hours a day on social media. So this is a much bigger conversation than we think.
How much time do you spend on your phone?
A lot.
6 hours?
I feel a little addicted. I'm feeling itchy right now because I can't take my phone.
Oh, yeah, it's hectic.
Yeah.
Because right now, globally, there's a growing focus on social media and how it's affecting our mental health and how much time we're actually spending online. Because the other day, my missus was coming home, right? And she was on a long trip. It's about an hour and a half. I thought, I have time to watch a movie. Let me quickly go onto social media. By the time she came home, I was still on social media. I didn't even watch the movie.
Imagine.
It's bad.
Yeah, how long was that?
Hour and a half, solid.
Sure. And sometimes, Danny, the most important and powerful insight, it doesn't come from studies, right? Studies are important, but sometimes it comes from the real people living it, going through the situation.
So Zister and I came across this amazing story. Her name is Kanso. And when in this story, she kind of opens up and shares her journey with her phone addiction and how it started impacting her mental health.
But what really stood out for us is what she did next. She turned that awareness into action.
Hi, my name is Hans. I am a gym girly / runner. So I'm a hybrid athlete. I have an addiction to my phone. And when my mental health is my screen time goes. So in honor of getting out of the rut and hopefully decreasing my screen time, for every hour that I spent on my phone last week, I'm going to do a kilometer run.
So what she did was she ran 1 kilometer for every hour she spends on her phone, a challenge that's got people talking. Now, we've heard this story, right? It's something that could probably be applauded.
Yeah, man. What is your addiction with social media? How long do you stay on it? And be honest with us. This is a judgment-free zone.
We speak to Edward Abraham, senior litigation attorney and partner at Thurimpather Attorneys, voted best law firm in the Best of Durban Readers' Choice Awards in 2024 and 2025 to unpack the legal side of this landmark ruling. We've been talking about a landmark case that's raising serious questions about social media, responsibility, and the law. A jury in Los Angeles has handed down a landmark ruling finding that social media platforms were intentionally designed in a way that contributed to a young woman's addiction and ultimately harmed her mental health.
So the woman in question, who is now 20, was awarded millions of dollars in damages, and this case could have ripple effects for hundreds of similar cases still to come.
Now, to help us unpack the legal side of it all, we're joined by Edward Abraham, senior litigation attorney and partner at Puther & Puther Attorneys.
Edward, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. Please, could you help us understand what this ruling really means?
Yeah, sure. So good morning to all the listeners. So obviously, there are two major legal developments in the United States, as you've mentioned, involving the Meta platforms and YouTube that are really starting to reshape how the law views social media. So the first landmark case, which you mentioned in Los Angeles, involved a young woman who began using Instagram and YouTube as a child, and she told the court that she had become addicted to these platforms and suffered serious mental health harm, including depression, anxiety, and self-harm. Now, traditionally, companies in the U.S. rely upon a powerful legal protection in the United States called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. In simple terms, there's social media platforms are obviously not legally responsible for content that is posted by users. But in this case, obviously, the argument was a little bit different. The claim was not about harmful posts. It was about the actual design of the platforms themselves. And in this case, the plaintiff had argued that features like the infinite scroll, autoplay, and the algorithm-driven recommendations were actually intentionally built to keep users engaged, and that this design was, in fact, defective and dangerous, especially for minors. So the claim was framed as a product liability and a negligence claim. So the court had to consider whether there was a duty of care and whether that duty of care was breached and whether the design of these platforms caused harm. There was also the failure to warn argument. Now, one of the most difficult issues in this case was causation. And the defense had argued in this case that mental health has many causes of harm. And the court, however, accepted that the platform design was the substantial contributing factor, which is enough in U.S. law. But I must say that in South African law, and our court would apply a stricter approach to this aspect of causation. So a jury in Los Angeles obviously agreed, and they found the both companies negligent. They awarded about $6 million, roughly 4.2 against Meta and 1.8 million against YouTube. So crucially, the court drew this distinction between content, which is protected, as I mentioned, under Section 230 in the U.S., and platform design, which is not clearly protected. Now, I must also tell you that what was interesting is that this verdict came one day after a separate case in New Mexico in the U.S., where $375 million was awarded in a case involving a failure to protect a minor from harmful content and interact. Now, lawyers in the United States are already comparing these cases to the big tobacco litigation that came in the past, where the tobacco companies were held liable for these harmful tobacco products they produced despite knowing the risk and failing to warn the public. And those cases, we know, ultimately led to massive payouts and sweeping regulations of tobacco and cigarettes in the world. So from a legal perspective, this is a test case in the United States. And there are already thousands of these similar cases waiting in the U.S. So if the appeal fails from Meta and YouTube, it could open the floodgates to many more lawsuits and force changes in how these platforms are designed. Now, from a South African perspective, I think two issues arise. One is jurisdiction and liability, because I suppose the question would come is, can me as a South African, if I suffer the same harm, can I sue Meta and Facebook at the same time? So in our court, on the question of jurisdictions, our court can hear a matter if there's a sufficient connection to South Africa. This includes where the harm is suffered. So even if the company is foreign, our law allows for what's called founding or conforming jurisdiction. This includes attaching assets of that company if they need.
Edward, I feel like we can talk about this all day. It is so intricate, and it's so fascinating. But for time purposes, can I just pause you right there, because it's time for news now at the top of the hour, and we'll get back to this because it is so interesting. Thank you so much, Edward Abraham, senior litigation attorney at Puther & Puther Attorneys. What a conversation.
It is East Coast Radio. Danny and Zisto with you. We're in for Darren, Carmen and Sky. The mighty trio return tomorrow bright and early from 6 a.m. We have been talking about social media and the addiction to social media and how much time you're actually spending on it.
Yeah, man. And because the numbers are telling a story too, you know, teens in South Africa, Danny, are spending over 3 hours a day on their phones on average, which is crazy.
Not as bad as the adults, because the adults are spending 6 hours a day. And that's hard to think.
Yeah.
Especially if you have like a serious job.
Like a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Like, when are you social mediaing? You know, adults, we don't get a free pass. Whether it's scrolling, streaming, or gaming, we're spending tons of time online.
Joining the show now is Andreas. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Good morning, Danny. Good morning to the listeners. Thank you for having me.
So tell us about your social media in particular. Are you addicted to it?
Well, the addiction comes in many forms because, you know, it's part of my daily job. I've got to keep the community informed. And what's happened in the Durban community and around South Africa is everybody is hungry for news.
Yeah.
You will always find somebody stuck in traffic that now wants to know why they're stuck in traffic. Why is there a plume of smoke on the freeway? They are on their way to a meeting. They're checking their phones because at the end of the day, they want to know what they want to know. And our job as journalists, get the story out there as quickly as possible. So it does have its benefit. It keeps the community informed. It keeps them entertained and educated in the same process. But then you get the other side of it where it becomes an addiction. And unfortunately, even in my job, I've become addicted to it because I need to get that story out. I need to inform the community and tell them, hey, listen, this shootout that's happened or this accident is going to affect your traffic and your travel. So that's where the balance comes, and how we find the balance, that's the challenge.
100%, and I can agree with you.
Do you not think as well, Andreas, that there's certain people out there that aren't journalists, right? And they rush to social media to post something just because they've seen it first and they don't consider the consequences of fake news and also the sensitivity behind what's happened?
Well, that happened in an incident last week where a visitor to our shores drowned on the beach, and an individual arrived on scene and started posting that, you know, he's like a journalist and he's posting the drowning that happened on the beach. And the family actually were with the individual that passed away, and then the family were getting phone calls from the Transvaal saying, listen, what's happened? I see this and this and this has happened. And they found out about it on social media, and that is very dangerous.
That's crazy.
It's very obtrusive. And it's very unprofessional.
Yeah, Andreas, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate your input today, okay?
Yeah.
No problem. Thank you for having us.
Good morning.
Yeah, man. Danny and Zisto in for Darren, Carmen, and Sky. We had a conversation earlier on about how addictive social media is. And we had a gentleman, Edward Abraham, who is a senior litigation attorney and partner at Pather & Pather Attorneys, just telling us how this case that happened in the US where a 20-year-old sued Meta for millions of dollars and how it could be brought back to home. What does that mean for us as South Africans? Because we know that people are addicted to the social media.
From a South African perspective, two issues arise: jurisdiction and liability. On the question of jurisdiction, now, our courts can hear a matter if there's sufficient connection to South Africa. That includes where the harm is suffered. But you would have to found jurisdiction. On the question of liability, we do not have the exact equivalent to Section 230, but under the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act, platforms have a limited protection for third-party content, provided they act when they are notified. A claim here would be based on the common law of delict. A claimant must prove wrongfulness, fault, causation, and harm. That remains a high threshold, especially in cases involving mental health, and our courts would require a clear and direct causal link, not just a contributing factor as accepted in the United States. For children, laws like the Children's Act and Protection of Personal Information Act strengthen the arguments around the duty of care. But this is bigger than just one case. What happens in the United States will have global consequences. If courts there force changes on how platforms are designed or regulated, those changes will flow across the entire global systems of Meta and YouTube. That means the way these apps function, the features they offer, and how they engage users could change worldwide, including here in South Africa. And alongside that, I think governments around the world are already responding to these aspects. In Australia, there are moves to restrict access for children under the age of 16. In Europe and United Kingdom, regulators are targeting addictive design features. And in China, for example, platforms like Facebook and Instagram are restricted and largely inaccessible with tight state control over digital platforms. So this is not just a United States case. Courts and governments around the world are asking one question: are these platforms simply tools, or are they products designed in a way that can cause harm? And for us in South Africa, I believe it's not a question of if change is coming, but when it reaches us.
You know when someone speaks and you go, yo, I trust that guy.
Yeah.
That's that guy.
100%.
Hey, that was Edward Abrams, senior litigation attorney and partner at Puther & Puther Attorneys. Thank you so much for your insight there.
Yeah, eh?
This is East Coast Radio.